Greetings. Hey, Laura. I am doing a review of Debbie Pearl's terrible book, How to Create a Better Brain Through Neuroplasticity. It's pretty awful. Hey, Cheryl. If you don't know me, I'm Suzanne Titkemeyer. I wrote for Pathos for over almost 10 years, and over 10 years with No Longer Quivering, talking about everything horrible about Quiverful, a theology that covers a lot of different denominations. I've known Catholic quiverfuls, I've known Baptist quiverfuls, I've known people with non-denomination. It crosses all lines. So if you think that I'm looking to defame Baptists or evangelicals, no. It's just we're talking about a theology that just crosses all borders, and that's where we're going. Let me explain to you a little bit who Debbie Pearl is, because I didn't start with this, and I probably should have. Debbie Pearl is the wife. What is going on outside? I'm still hearing yells and shouts and slams. Debbie Pearl is the wife of Michael Pearl. They have a ministry called No Greater Joy. Most of their books involve shaming and blaming. They believe in beating children, beating them severely. Oh, thank you. I just got this. They believe in beating children severely. They believe in suppressing women. They believe in wives just living how the husband says. And Debbie's told some pretty horrific tales of her marriage, including her husband coming back with rotten rabbits and expecting her to fry them up, living on no income whatsoever, feeding their kids seed corn and cat food at one point. I hate it when people say the quiverful religion. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, Laura. Like I was just saying, this is a brand spanking new dress I bought yesterday at PriceSmart, which is Costa Rica's answer to Costco. They even have the same products and everything. So once a year they bring in these cheap little beach dresses, and I always grab one or two. I actually grabbed the last one yesterday. So Debbie and Mike believe in being as abusive as possible. But then, like 5 years ago, Michael had a stroke. And he hasn't been seen quite as actively in the ministry. He went off to get that stem cell treatment that they sometimes will give in the U.S. and around the world in different places. And they claim it fixes strokes. And there's no evidence of that. Medical science and places like Johns Hopkins have studied this and says it's largely unhelpful. So Michael is not quite himself. So Debbie's trying to rebrand herself as a little less abusive. So that is what this book is about, and that is what almost all of her projects since Mike had his stroke have been about. They've been all about rebranding her, rebranding the ministry as something less abusive, which you have to read behind the lines now, between the lines of these things. Okay, we're going to dive right in. Last time I was talking about music and creating a better brain. This time, and I'm on part 4, I discovered after I got all confused last night. This one is about play. Debbie Pearl is talking about letting children play. And this chapter, she starts off with repeating a pile of almost lies and wishful thinking that this stupid book is. She says that our brains are all moldable plastic until the day we do die. Well, sort of. And she keeps talking about brain grooving. That's something that she talked about in pretty intense detail in their magazine. Said that the kids were probably happy he went down after the abuse. I wouldn't doubt that. There have been 2 divorces too among their children, even though they claim they're divorced. Their children are raised divorced. Proves there have been some problems. They haven't exactly turned out as well as what they're saying. So Debbie likes to talk about brain grooving. She's written several articles about it in the No Greater Joy magazine. So I kind of skipped over a lot of her crap about brain grooving when I did my review. Brain grooving is basically when you do an action and you keep repeating the action until it becomes muscle memory and rote. It's not necessarily a bad thing. They say if you're trying to quit smoking or lose weight or whatever, or make yourself exercise, like I'm trying to do, what happens is that if you have a habit and you do it anywhere from 30 to 45 days, it becomes automatic and you do it automatically. There's some truth to that. You know, there is some truth to that. I've been able to kind of transform my eating, my diet by doing that. And it does make a difference. But here's the thing. She's saying it's the answer to everything. Not necessarily. It's a good thing. But she says also that if you brain groove to the wrong stuff, it's going to be stuck in there forever. That's a bunch of BS. You can change your thinking at any time. You can redo and undo your habits. There's so many things I've done so differently now that it's not impossible to stop and change your thinking or your brain grooving, as she seems to say, because she says it's like, when they used to cut records back in the old days, they had these big albums. Maybe you'd have like Rolling Stones or whatever, and Led Zeppelin, put it on, put the little needle on it. When they make those records, they use this big machine for the master to groove it in, to take the blank disc and cut the actual tracks in to use as a master to press all the others. That is how she's talking about grooving. She never explains that that's what it is, just says cuts a track. And that's exactly what she's talking about here. So back to brain grooving. She says you got to start it on your kids when they're babies, like Janessa Rodriguez. And she says that Janessa Rodriguez is nothing to fear because time will wipe away her brain damage and any other kid's brain damage and replace it with healthy brain function by brain grooving. Well, that's another one of those half lies that Debi talks about. It's a good thing, but it's also a really bad thing too, because that's not exactly how this works. If you have brain damage, you are going to be unable to brain groove away from that. It's always going to be there. Can you rewire your brain around it? Sometimes, with enough physical therapy, occupational therapy, healing, various things, you can get better, even from severe strokes like Micah had. But there's nothing she said that indicates he's gotten any kind of traditional treatment that's helpful at all. It's just talking about brain grooving. And like I said, they did the stem cell thing that has been proven not to be helpful. Hey, Claire. So now she's talking about, she brought a physical therapist in the next chapter, bashed American academics for not having enough physical playtime, throw shade at the government and any parent that dares to schedule music lessons and or sports. Debi, I mean, it's pretty obvious she has no idea how public school operates anymore. That they've now incorporated physical activity, movement, play throughout the day. There's recesses, there's PE, there's all that stuff. There are schools now that realize that some kids actually do better with being allowed to sit there with a fidget cube or whatever, that they have to have certain kinds of activity in order to do active learning. It is, Laura, but I think that one of the reasons that Jill does it is just so that it keeps CPS out of her house. It keeps any government agency out of her house, which is a shame because she would be eligible for free therapy for that child in the home. And B, it allows her to be the hero of her own story. And we all know that she exhibits some highly narcissistic mother tendencies, including needing to be seen as the hero of her own story, which is pretty ridiculous because we're all going to be the hero and the goat of our own stories, depending upon who we talk to. And most of us are fine with that. It's only people with narcissistic tendencies that think they have to be the hero, be seen that way by everybody. And they go pretty far to achieve that. Box of Kleenex without a box of Kleenex. Okay. So Debi just spent the better part of the two previous chapters singing the praises of a child learning a musical instrument and decides to throw out what she said. And the therapist is talking about the importance of physical activity, but bashing sports activities. Organized sports. It's just too early in the day for this kind of hypocrisy and mental twister. But I got to say, I really want one of those twister inflatable bounce houses. I've seen those things. That looks like a lot of fun and a good way to get a lot of activity, even if I'm an old lady. But I guess in Debi Town, that would be satanic. Okay, so Debi's expert goes on to bash any sort of screen activity at all, claiming to treat teens with bad posture from video games she only sees in extremely elderly people. I'm guessing she's never seen Dance Dance Revolution, where you're dancing, or any of the other physical video games. There are those. It's not all sitting around like a bumper stunned deer staring at a screen. It's not all that. And she and her expert, they don't get that. They only think that this is the way it is, and you can't have fun with screens. I got to say, the most fun Thanksgiving I've ever spent was at one of my daughter's homes. And after we were all stuffed with turkey, we went down to the basement to play Dance Dance Revolution. And we were all pointing and laughing at each other, pointing and laughing because it was pretty ridiculous. And the last time I was visiting my kids back in September, October, what am I saying? I've totally lost track of time because the weather's the same here all the time. It's hard to say. Was it October? Was it November? It was October. I was there, and my son showed me his virtual reality games, and I like to have died laughing when he was doing the downhill skiing. He's got his virtual reality helmet. He's got the things like with his body. Funniest thing ever. That was my husband. He did zero with the kids and took credit for the successful moments. No, Cheryl, that happens. There are some men like that. My ex was like that. So her expert, her faux expert, uses Romanian orphanages and monkeys to state one must primarily play as a child. And if you don't play, you end up with violent teenagers. This is followed by bashing any toy you might buy your kids, except for sticks, stones, and pine cones. They actually listed those as the three most important toys to expose your kids to, because it causes you to use your brain to be creative and imaginative, and there is a place for that. But I'm going to say this. Play is the primary job of childhood. It is. And play and learning, and those things are sometimes intertwined and sometimes not. And toys can be overrated. I have seen kids with too many toys. I mean, that does happen. But to say you can't have any toys but pine cones and sticks and stones, it's pretty ridiculous. It's just justifying extreme poverty. That's all they're doing. So then Debi goes and starts talking about taking her young children to go play in a waterfall. There's just one problem with her waterfall story. That waterfall provides the spring water they drink down the river. So she had toddlers in diapers playing in their water supply and seems to think that that is A-okay. I'm surprised the whole clan of them didn't keel over and die from salmonella and God knows what. Then the expert goes on to say that you should only put your newborn baby to sleep on its stomach, because that's how brains are developed. That's also how children choke to death in the middle of the night. That's not at all what the AMA says. They really want you to put them on their back or their sides, not this frontal sleeping. And I like frontal sleeping. It doesn't like me, but I can see where it would be comfortable and comforting if you were a baby to sleep that way. However, the evidence is against it, regardless of what this, quote, physical therapist is saying. There's a few more pages that you only develop your brain if you're running around playing barefoot, because shoes inhibit the child's ability to brain groove and grow that brain. There's nary a mention of nails, stepping on glass, or the other nasty things that can breed massive infections or just simple tetanus. Promoting possible tetanus, producing behavior while hating on vaccines should be a crime. So the entire chapter is what Debi does, is spoken by another Fruit Looped individual who likely has a degree from some sort of non-legitimate source. At least the chapter was short, even if it was particularly stupid. And then we move on to look at the brains of young children. Chapter 6, all screens are evil. The evil. So I start out with a crazy Debbie Pearl fearmongery quote. Neuroplasticity has taught us that we can literally damage or retard our children's brain structure, or we can enhance it by what we allow and disallow in their lives. Why do I have the feeling she's about to go off and beat up on poor Esponja again? I just have a feeling. Sid's Israel. Yeah, absolutely. And so is Throw is spitting up and choking on it. That's why there's all kinds of reasons why you wouldn't put your baby in those positions. Not to mention suffocating with your face all the way down. I mean, that happens. So she has the nerve to say this crap while her and her husband advocate beating the crap out of your child using a 1/4 inch plumbing line, plastic plumbing line. It tells us that doesn't brain groove. I'm sure that does more damage to your brain than anything that Debbie thinks about screens. I'm sure it does. Debbie goes on to explain that neurons in the brain are like a telephone system. Then she's doing that whole oversimplification, neurotransmitters, and then she leapfrogs over to memory and pictures. Here's her quote on picture learning. I do remember the capitals of most states in this country because the author created pictures in my mind to help me remember these details. For example, for the state of Pennsylvania, he said to think of a man holding a pencil in his hand who's getting a haircut while eating a burger. The pencil is to remind us of Pencil from Pennsylvania. His hair is hair, and the burger is Berg, both from Harrisonburg. Here, I haven't seen that book. I'm actually looked at it. That is a way that we teach children sometimes to learn about those things. Oh yeah, they hit with hard objects. And that is definitely abuse, and that causes all kinds of brain damage. From everything I'm reading from research, beating your children causes all kinds of significant brain problems. So this book she's talking about is a children's book, and she goes on to explain that she learned the capitals and used these word pictures as an adult. She took a children's book and learned the capitals, which apparently with her high school diploma, she never picked up on or covered during her years in public school. So I don't know what they were teaching her up in Tennessee, but it was not that. Harrisonburg isn't the capital of Pennsylvania? I thought it had been. Yeah. So anyway, she likely got some other stuff wrong. I didn't even pick up on that. And I've been here Harrisonburg a pile of times. Harrisburg. What am I saying? Harrisburg. Harrisonburg is in Virginia, so I do tend to scramble those in my mind sometimes. Harrisburg, PA. I'm sorry. It's Harrisburg. You are absolutely right, Laura S. That one is on me and my brain. Maybe I brain groove to the wrong things too much. So she read this book as an adult. I learned the factoid about Pennsylvania and Harrisburg from learning a piece when I was taking piano lessons as a child that was written to commemorate the founding of of Pennsylvania. And the piece explained, they went on, when they taught us the piece, went on to explain who the state was named for, how they came up with the name, how Sylvania had to do with the woods. They came up with all kinds of word pictures. No, Cheryl, she was not homeschooled. She was public schooled in rural Tennessee. So I can't vouch for what her public school taught her, because where we lived in Virginia, the schools were excellent. But just south of us, the schools didn't even have, they weren't even accredited. That's how bad they were. So I'm not saying that all schools in rural areas are bad. I've seen some excellent ones. But at the same time, if the school district is super poor, like it is near Memphis, where you have rural Mississippi, you've got rural Tennessee right outside of Memphis, you have these very big pockets of poverty. Some of the schools are kind of substandard in that area, and that's where she went to school. And she did not go to college in any way, shape, or form. She claims to be self-educated from reading, and while I believe that's an important part, if you're reading junk going into your mind, it's not scientific at all, you're picking up junk. To the point where she keeps citing all these studies in this book and coming to the wrong conclusions that the scientists that ran the studies did not come to. Okay, so she comes up with an imaginary child named Roger, who's 3 years old. Roger does not look adults in the eye. He's got a stymied intellect. His emotional and physical activities are very limited, and she blames that on the fact that he is allowed to use screens. Then she talks about an imaginary girl by the name of Baby Sue, who's the same age. And her parents train her using music and pleasure. No mention of beating the crap out of her. And Baby Sue is very, very, very well behaved and sits still for her parents, is in total joy, makes eye contact, all of that. Apparently, she was never allowed to use screens. I'm sorry. There's a dog out there that is provoking my cats that must have walked into the gate. So the girls talk about training their kids to behave in church. And instead of saying, pulling out that rod and beating the crap out of them, which is what they actually did, they are saying they use crayons and coloring books and creative toys, which we know is not true. She's talked about it too many times in books. It's a good way to keep a child sitting still if you leave them in adult church, which isn't really appropriate in some churches. But it's not the Cheryl, I've seen that. I've worked with that. I had an employee at a place I worked at when I was one of the children's residential treatment centers I worked at. We were doing documents one day. We were doing treatment documents. And she was homeschooled. I gave her a huge stack of treatment documents and I said, put them in alphabetical order so you can file them in the correct charts. Guess what she did? She sorted them by first names. First names. And she was so proud to show me her big stack of sorted documents. And I looked and I was like, wait a minute. Why are these sorted by first names? Well, you said to sort them out alphabetically. She was homeschooled. And there were a number of staff who was with her like that. They finally had to let her go. And then her parents came back with well, she's got brain damage and X and Y and Z, ADHD. They were claiming that we had to reemploy her because she had brain problems. She had brain problems, all right. It was the brain problem she had that was the worst was the crap her parents taught her. Couldn't make change. Couldn't send her anywhere with money and say, hey, get 3 of these, 2 of these, whatever, and bring me the change in the receipt and have it be accurate. She just was not She was not good at doing practical things at all. I had a terrible time with her. So then Debbie goes on to talk about something I do believe in, something that I'm going to say is a good thing. I find this to be very true for me if I'm struggling to listen to somebody who is droning on and on. And this is why I've told pastors of churches I've been, it's like, you're going to see me with my head down and my cell phone in my hands. Know that I am playing a puzzle game, but I'm listening because I'm one of those weirdos. I had to be manipulating something to do super active listening. So Debbie ends with this, says this. In the former days, I remember that many ladies brought their knitting to church. The preacher knew they were listening much better than hypnotized people staring at him as he spoke. Debbie goes on to claim that's everybody. No. That's not how it works at all. Some people do need to have something to manipulate in their hands while they're doing stuff, but it's not necessarily have to be knitting. It can be video games like I was just discussing, or fidget cubes, all sorts of different things. I knew somebody that had a little teeny tiny Etch-a-Sketch that during boring lectures would use it. And I understand why, because there are some of us that just had to be manipulating something with our hands to switch on the active listening gene. I asked her to cut something into quarters. No idea what quarters meant. Oh, Cheryl, that sounds about right. I knew one homeschooled girl in my town that couldn't even handle working at Chick-fil-A or any other kind of job. Every time she get a job, she would last just the training and then get kicked out. And eventually she ended up homeless on the street. Her parents tossed her out because she wouldn't, quote, wouldn't work. Well, she couldn't work. And tragic things happened to that poor girl. And I loved that poor girl. I used to teach her art lessons. She was a sweetheart, but she ended up pregnant on the streets. When she gave birth to her baby after she was homeless, her evangelical Christian parents went to court, seized custody of the baby, and would not allow her anywhere near the child. The last I heard, she was still living on the streets. I would run into her every time I manned the winter warming shelter, every single time. And I would always take her off into one of the other rooms and sit with her and talk to her and see what we could do about helping her. But it was just a tragic situation for somebody I knew that was just a wonderful child that came out of this kind of nonsense. So Debbie goes on to say that Michael's sermons have created kids that are now pastors. They have disdain, and they don't have the disdain and hatred thrown at parents that force their kids to go to church. And there's none of that bashing or any of that. They're talking about how many pastors and fine, upstanding individuals Mike's sermons are creative. That's where I would say pictures or it just did not happen. I think that it's very unlikely that it happened. Cheryl, I agree. Most people who successfully homeschool, I know, do get outside help. There are educational cooperatives. I spent about a year doing art lessons for homeschooling world, and I have some very distinct thoughts about that. It did not go well because I ran into children with, I'm just going to say, with inappropriate levels of social development and physical development, mental and emotional development. I was spending more time dealing with behaviors than I ever did when I went into my kids' elementary public schools and taught art, because for a while our school system did not have the funding for arts, and I would be one of those parents that would go in and actually teach it in elementary school levels, go into my kids' classes because of the fact they didn't have funding for art. And I've always felt that art, music, all of those things, they're very important to developing a well-rounded child. Her and I will agree on that. She talks about how you got to have all those things too, but I don't see that she ever did that with her kids. And so we get this quote. A recent study of more than 2,600 toddlers showed that for every hour of TV the toddlers watch each day, their chances of developing Serious attentional difficulties by age 7 increased by over 10%. TV watching correlates with severe brain problems. She covered this before. The study that she is referencing is considered to be not a very accurate one. It was one where they asked the mothers to self-report. They did a lot of self-reporting, and they did not do a lot of follow-up. They asked the mothers to evaluate their children's mental fitness after watching all this TV. The scientists and pediatricians that have followed this study have said the study is meaningless by the way the research took place. The entire issue of screens and attention disorders is a complex one at best. At best. I'm not saying sit your child in front of a screen 24/7, because clearly that's not healthy. But clearly some screen time can be beneficial. Debi warns that allowing your toddlers to have screen time overstimulates the neurons with screens, flashing lights, loud noises, and then she turns around, flips it, and says you have to keep your child stimulated to grow the neurons. So which is it? You can't have both of them. That's what I don't understand. She's saying one thing, and then she's following it up with an opposite in all ways. And then we have the most awful thing, gut health. Okay, gut health is really important. I agree. She claims that you should never use antibiotics because they kill gut health, and gut health is brain health, and your gut is your second brain. She says vaccines do the same thing. She talks about how if you use antibiotics and vaccines, it prunes the brain connections back. And we're done. But next week, we get to talk about executive function, which is important. But guess what? You can't brain groove executive function. That's something you just gradually build over time with the right kind of education. And a lot of us, executive function doesn't fully kick in until we're 25, 26, somewhere in that range. It's part of that being able to handle the impulsivity that some of us can get, because teenagers are notoriously impulsive. They have that impulsivity. And that's why, earlier when I was talking about politics, I didn't really want to talk about Kyle Rittenhouse. I really don't want to talk about anybody that I think maybe has impulsivity disorder and their parent failed them. So, not saying that was the only cause, but I'm saying that when somebody is doing these kinds of things in their teens, you got to look at the fact that they're not mature. I mean, absolutely. Should people be punished for doing bad things? Yes. But at the same time, the parent probably needs more punishing than the child if they encouraged it, because kids are impulsive. They are impulsive. They're going to do stupid things. God knows I did a pile of stupid things. Thank God all my stupid things happened before the internet, or you would all see them and laugh. And I still probably continue to do stupid things to this day. It just is what it is. I bought some stupid things I haven't used. I was the one that suggested the hot tub, putting it in, and I can't even use it. So that's the thing with Debi. Is she keeps flip-flopping. She keeps citing all this research that isn't really applicable, or she's misunderstanding it. There's a survey that she cited in a chapter that when I get to that chapter, I'm going to have to pull up my old notes, because she put that chapter as a story at their magazine, No Greater Joy. So I skipped that chapter in the book, but it's all about the Stanford cookie or marshmallow experiment. And it's all about being able to put things off. I mean, can you anticipate you're going to have a greater reward in 15 minutes if you just wait? That's what the study was about. Debbie makes different statements about the study. She tries to say that the study shows that Christian kids can wait for the greater reward, but kids that look at screens, heathen kids, blah, 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 they grab the one cookie or the one marshmallow or the one pretzel right up front. The survey actually didn't say that at all. The survey actually said that economic instability, food insufficiency, things like that affected whether the child was going to get one cookie now or two cookies in 15 minutes. The kids that did not suffer from any kind of instability in the home, food insecurity, any of that, were more likely to wait than children who were poor, who had been through the ringer with that. They would take the cookie right off hand. It's heartbreaking. You're right. It is heartbreaking. But not all people benefit from homeschooling without outside help. You are exactly right. And one of the books I'm reading right now is about the Turpin family. And if there was ever a case of using the excuse of homeschooling to hide abuse, which is something that occurs actually in evangelical households, evangelical fundamentalist households that homeschool, sometimes there's abuse. And they use homeschooling to hide it. Everybody and their brother on the internet swears that Jill Rodriguez is not feeding her children properly. And I got to say, looking at the emaciated children that she has, it's pretty easy to believe that without any real evidence of it beyond their appearances. Poor Sophia Rodriguez, that poor child, she just looks like she's on death's door. She looks like she's a refugee from some very poor society. She doesn't look healthy at all. So it is alleged that the Rodriguezes left New York State because of people were reporting them for neglecting their children. And then they then left West Virginia for the same reason. I don't know. I do know that in West Virginia, they were on the verge of passing a law before COVID struck that if you had just one CPS report, you were required to put your kids in public school. And apparently, they couldn't risk it, so they moved to Ohio, which has much more lax laws on homeschooling and will allow you to hide your abuse and neglect if that's what you're doing, which I'm not saying at all. Laura, Sadie, I just want to grab up that little child and take her home. I just do, and want to spoil her and stuff her with treats. Let her watch all the TV she wants and eat all the junk food she wants. That is, I gotta say that's one of the great things about being a grandmother. You don't have to worry about basic discipline. You don't have to worry about basic nutrition. If your grandchild, okay, I'll be telling a true story. Recently, when I was visiting and I was around one of my grandchildren and my eldest daughter, we were going to go buy groceries or something. And my granddaughter said, I want some cans of SpaghettiOs. And my daughter said, you don't need SpaghettiOs, they're junk. I just said, baby, I'll buy you your SpaghettiOs. And I did. And I told my daughter, shh. Kind of rude, but that's the nice part of being a grandmother. You can do those things. You can get away with it. I'm just mortified and horrified that none of the grandmothers in that family are doing that. Man, if that was my daughter-in-law and those kids look like that, I would be in her house a lot. I'd be saying, okay, what the hell's going on here? Here, everybody have Oreos or whatever. And I don't see that happen. It doesn't sound like that there's any involvement from the families. I'd stuff her with meat, potatoes, and vegetable strips. You're right, Laura. You'd have to mix it all up. You'd have to give her healthy foods too, in addition to ice cream and cookies and candy. Oh, so I had to laugh one time. One of my grandkids was at my house and she asked me for a Band-Aid because she cut herself or something. She was little. And so I gave her a Band-Aid and then she ended up with like 10 Band-Aids on different parts. And I let her do it because I don't have to live with her. And then she went to where she knows I keep my chocolate, was pointing for the chocolate. It's like, okay, if you know where I keep my chocolate, I'm definitely going to give you some. And that was kind of the way it went with us is they'd show up and bang on my piano, torture my, well, not torture my parrot, but play with my parrot, play with the parrot, jump on my waterbed. And I would be like, you go for it. Grandkids can do no wrong as far as I'm concerned. You just get to spoil them the way you could not spoil your own kids because you didn't want them turning out to be crappy individuals. Okay. Yes, Jill's mom is as dippy as Jill. I know because she homeschooled Jill. That's how we came up with Jill, was that her mother, that everybody calls turtleneck Trish. And after getting some loose skin on my neck, I can kind of see why turtleneck Trish is wearing turtlenecks. I know it's an older lady go-to, so there's that. So she raised all of those girls. One of the girls, Lisa Moravec, I covered her book, Serene's Serenity, and it was so poorly written. It's pretty obvious that Trish did a really crappy job homeschooling those girls, and now they are homeschooling all their own kids. So it's kind of like, when you make a mimeograph, that's just how old I am because they don't call it that. When you make a copy, you put your original in the machine and you make a copy. Then if you go back later and you've lost your original, you take your copy and put your copy on the copier and print another copy. And if you keep doing that, you notice that the copies get lighter and lighter and lighter. I kind of think that's what's going to end up with all these homeschooling kids that are from parents who've been homeschooled. Not the second gen, the third gen. I think that we're going to end up with some significant um, gaps in education so bad that it's going to swing the pendulum against homeschooling. You may even see laws passed against it. I kind of laugh here because here in Costa Rica, homeschooling is against the law. You can't do it. If they catch you doing it, they will seize your child. You have to have your child at either a public or private school here. Has to be, and they have to be, of course, registered with the government. I see Christians that come here and try to homeschool who aren't residents here, don't even file for residency. The government rolls in and says, where are the vaccination records? Well, I don't vaccinate. I don't believe in it. It said 100% vaccination here. And I'm homeschooling. It's like, well, you have 10 days to leave the country or vaccinate your children and put them in school, or else we're going to take the children and deport you. That's what happens here. No, most of the time, Jenna, they don't. So many states in the country do not require any kind of curriculum, no testing, no nothing. Many places, like I know Virginia, where I came from, they don't require anything. You just show up and do it. You don't have to. You may have to tell the school system that that's what you're doing, but you don't have to do all the other stuff, and you don't have to prove that you're doing it well. That's the other horrible thing. And I've said this before. I have had friends that homeschooled that did such a great job. Their kids ended up at 16 with full scholarships to places like UVA. And then I have friends, on the other hand, that flunked out at it so badly that their kids literally could not find jobs and literally could not work. Every time they tried to work, it was a disaster. So I'd like to see that regulated. I know that goes against everything, and you've got also got homeschool legal defense. The legal defense people, they are against that, and they have on their website, they have all this stuff about homeschooling internationally, and they have it all wrong for Costa Rica and Panama and some of the other countries down there. They say, oh, there's no law against it, so you can do it. That's not true. So they are luring people into homeschooling in places that don't allow it. Cheryl, I think that too. I mean, they make kids in public school do standardized tests and private school do standardized testing to make sure they're on target. On target to make sure. Jenna, that I know that's a thing, and the thing is, they are fear mongers. They're fear mongers and they give out the wrong information. That's what's so horrible about them. They put some of their people in these positions when they do stuff, and they're really charging people and not providing accurate information at all. And they've really screwed up the laws on education in the entire country. It's a shame what they've done. I don't know how they sleep at nights, the people who work there. How do you feel about CR making homeschooling illegal? I think it's a good idea. The reason that I say that is that the homeschoolers I have seen here are pretty much not very good at it. It's not like my friends that got their children into got their children into UVA. It's just not like that. It's people who just don't want to be bothered and want to surf all day and whatever. We get a lot of that here. We get a lot of those type of people trying to homeschool too. Or you have your super Christian fundamentalist ones that are homeschooling who've been told by homeschool legal defense people that it's okay to do it here and think they're coming to a place with more freedom that actually has stricter laws than all of that, much stricter laws. So one of my Cub Scouts and his 4 siblings had amazing homeschooling. Yeah, I've seen it work. I've seen it work right. They do need to test. Absolutely, they need to test. So I think if Costa Rica is going to allow it, they need to have testing every year. But right now, they don't allow it. They just do not allow it. They have really good public school system here. The problem is if you put your child in the public school system, they're going to be taught entirely in Spanish. There's no English. There may be additional English classes you can pay for, but it's going to be all in Spanish. And the facilities aren't very nice. You should see how they teach the kids here. They have like big corrugated tin huts outside that they teach them in, and they get good educations. And anybody that wants to go to college can go for free here. If you can pass the test, you can go for free. It isn't for lazy parents. You're exactly right. That's the problem. It's not for lazy parents. We get a lot of lazy parents that come here that want to homeschool, and that's why I'm against it here, because of what I've seen. I have an acquaintance here that actually runs a private school that is pretty reasonable for the most part. And then almost across the street is another private school. What is the name of that one? I can't recall the name of that school, but there's also one down the street in a place called Brasilito that, what is that? CREA, we call it, CREA. And they send kids to top universities. They have, a lot of their kids go to Ivy League. So if you can send your kids to CREA here, you're going to get a top-notch education that you wouldn't get in a private school or a homeschool in the States or here or anything. And they have people there who have been college professors that teach it. It's a really good option. I know people that send their kids there. The free public colleges and universities pretty good. Yes, they are, because that is where they're sending their people to be educated, to be doctors, to be lawyers, to be and there's tourism is so big here. They have huge universities that have tourism programs. They have ecology programs, conservation programs, all of that. Most of the study programs are things that benefit everybody. And the way they do doctors here is kind of curious too, because the doctor I like to call little baby doctor, he's like 22. So when you get out of your basic, like 4 years of medical school, specialty college, you can go right to work as a doctor. Now you're working under more experienced doctors, obviously. And you're going to be doing stuff like colds and headaches for a long time. But that's how you get your experience. And a lot of them find themselves working for the CAHA, which is the socialized free medicine here that you can sign up for. So they do 4 years at one of those, and they can get a job just about anywhere as a doctor, because you're going to see everything there. So there's that. So I don't understand how they do their doctoring education quite like they do in the States, but everybody's pretty educated. I've only run across one doctor that did not know, had never heard of one of my conditions. And while I was talking to him, he was pulling up all his stuff online to find out about it, which was okay. The residents, yuck, every summer. They don't even write prescriptions for me. I know. And that's the thing. If you go to a teaching hospital in the States, and I've had this happen to me a bunch of times. So I used to go to UVA for a lot of things because they're one of the better hospitals in Virginia. But there's a bad thing about it. If you have anything even slightly unusual, and when my daughter popped up with ITP, they ran every intern and resident through her room, and everyone else, everybody had to go take a look at and examine the kid with ITP because, and I would sit there and listen to them say, you'll probably never see a case of this in your entire doctoring career, but we're going to let you look at this child that has it so you can see what the different things are. So there was that. I remember having a pap smear in a room full of interns and interns, and I was medical students, but I was not impressed. That was a very bad experience. And so for some things, I would not go there again. For that sort of thing, no. And I once had a barium enema in a room full of residents. And that was kind of weird. I was joking with my husband afterwards. It's like, that fantasy where you're naked in a room full of gorgeous young men does not play out like that with a rubber hose up your rear end. It's not supposed to go like that. So there's that. So I've almost talked an hour now. I'm going to go ahead and get off. I've got to go get a tire and do some other stuff today. We had a tire pop yesterday. We were driving, and we went to Costco for the day. Had to deal with the tire. Now we have to deal with the tire again. So stay healthy. Do all your own research. Don't take everything that I'm saying as the gospel. This is just my opinions and what I've learned through my years of dealing with Quiverful. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you later.